Bigfoot phenomena. Most specifically, why, after all these years, can we never seem to find hard evidence that the creature exists? Let's get into it. I know that the subject of Bigfoot has been exhaustively covered on YouTube and everywhere else, it seems, but I've never come across a video that asks the most important question of all. With all the technology available to us today, with more people looking for the elusive creature than ever before, why can't we ever seem to find anything? Now, please understand that my purpose here is not to convince you that Bigfoot is real, nor is it to convince you that he is purely mythological. Chances are, if you are watching a video like this, you already have a pretty strong opinion one way or the other. So I'm not going to try and change your mind either way. What I'm interested in is, if such a creature as Bigfoot truly does exist, why can't we find it? Before we answer that, though, a little backstory is in order. As you probably are aware, stories of big hairy ape men existing in some of the most remote places on Earth are not only common, but have been told for centuries. There's the Alma of Central Asia, the Yowie of Australia, and of course the Yeti of the Himalayas, along with a host of other such creatures. So it's obvious that if these animals exist, they are possibly more common than we might imagine. In fact, there may be thousands or tens of thousands of these creatures in existence, making the question of why we can't seem to find one, or at least the skeletal remains of one, so frustrating. After all, primatologists have no trouble finding and observing the great apes and gorillas of Africa. So why is it so difficult to get close to one of these creatures so we can obtain hard scientific proof that they exist? Of course, it should be recognized that the silverback gorilla wasn't officially recognized by science until 1907. So science has always been a little slow to find and identify previously unknown creatures. Obviously, one reason that Bigfoot is so hard to find may be because he doesn't exist. That seems to be the general scientific consensus and opinion of most people. Of course, holding that position means that every bit of evidence for the creature, every anecdotal story, and there are literally thousands of them, every bit of video and audio evidence, and every plaster casting of a footprint are all either hoaxes or misidentifications of known animals, such as bears. While most people have no trouble holding to such a position, I personally find it difficult to imagine that the sum total of all Bigfoot evidence is a big fat zero. While hoaxing and misidentified animals is undoubtedly a part of the equation, it is insufficient to account for all of it. Plus, one must take into account the fact that these creatures have been a part of indigenous beliefs for centuries, long before whites came along to muddy the mythological waters, suggesting that they have been known and feared by many cultures for a very long time. So what if these creatures aren't purely mythological? What if there's at least a kernel of truth to these stories? Unfortunately, all we have to go by here is usually out of focus or shaky videos of something walking through the woods, a few dozen interesting recordings of howls and whoops and other vocalizations purported to have come from a Sasquatch, and an ever-growing plethora of footprint casts to work from. There have also been a few hair samples that have been tested, but to date these have always come back as either inconclusive or as having come from a known animal. I mean, the best video evidence we have for Bigfoot being real is the famous Patterson-Gimlin film taken in 1967, and that's almost 60 years ago. Surely in all this time someone should have come up with something even better to prove the creature's existence, and if so, where is it? The standard response to this is that the creatures are so hard to find because they are naturally and understandably afraid of being seen and potentially even hunted, which is fine and probably quite true, but that doesn't explain things. Many animals in nature are leery of coming in contact with humans and will hide whenever one is around, but that doesn't prevent them from being found, studied, and even captured alive. So how does Bigfoot and his Asian and Australian cousins get away with it? I think I have a few ideas. First, let's confine this discussion to the North American version known as Bigfoot, or, as I prefer, Sasquatch, which I think sounds less hokey. Next, we'll ask the question as to why there seems to be such a lack of physical remnants of such a creature. Aside from footprints and occasional hair samples, no one's ever found a Sasquatch carcass, or even as much as a single bone that science cannot identify, which on the surface sounds like a problem. Or is it? While one can occasionally stumble across the bones of a cow or a deer in the wilderness, it is exceedingly rare and indeed almost impossible to find the remains of a bear or a mountain lion or some other predator in the wild. Obviously, this is due to two reasons. First, the tendency for scavengers to quickly consume and scatter the skeletal remains of any cadavers they find, and the fact that predators are far fewer in number than our prey animals. For example, there are somewhere between 600 to 900,000 black bears, along with some 55,000 brown and grizzly bears in North America, and maybe 10 to 20,000 mountain lions as well. But there are close to 35 million deer on the continent. If one adds bighorn sheep and free-ranging cattle populations to the mix, then the number of potential remains of prey animals is massive, which is why one occasionally stumbles across them in the wild. As such, and if Sasquatch are even fewer in number than known predator populations, it's logical to assume that there should be even fewer remains potentially available to be found. So how many Sasquatch are we talking here? Obviously, there's no way to know with any certainty, but we might make an educated guess. Genetics tells us that in order to maintain a healthy breeding population for any species, generally requires a minimum population of 50 individuals to prevent inbreeding depression in the short term, and 500 to maintain a long-term genetic diversity and evolutionary potential. This is often referred to as the 5,500 rule. However, the specific number can vary depending on factors like biology, genetic diversity, and environmental conditions. Also, if we consider how far-ranging the Sasquatch appears to be, reports of the creature come from every state except Hawaii. There may well be scores of such breeding populations scattered across the United States and Canada. That means, and while this is largely speculative, that there could be anywhere from a few thousand to possibly as many as 10 to 20,000 Sasquatch living on this continent today. While this sounds like a lot, remember that's only a tenth of the number of bears and even less than the mountain lion population. So we're still talking about a very small number of creatures here. Additionally, it's possible that the Sasquatch exists in tribes, much like primitive human societies did thousands of years ago and still do in some parts of the world today. In that case, might they be prone to recovering or even burying their dead? For that matter, could they practice ritual cannibalism, that is, ingesting the flesh of their dead in order to acquire the deceased soul or spiritual energy, as human tribal cannibals used to do? Okay, so let's examine the other more common objection to why we can't seem to find a Sasquatch. If such a creature does exist, why don't we occasionally see one in the wild? After all, even though bears and mountain lions are few in number and widely scattered across the country, hikers and hunters still sometimes come across them. So why not a Sasquatch? Well, actually people do occasionally encounter a Sasquatch, but since science doesn't believe such a creature exists, as opposed to bears and mountain lions, such stories are routinely dismissed or even ridiculed. Naturally, such a reaction tends to suppress the willingness to report spotting one, resulting in the likelihood that there may be more sightings than we know of, though most go unreported. Additionally, many researchers believe the Sasquatch to be more of a nocturnal hunter-scavenger, and few humans are willing to walk through the forest in the dark, further reducing the chances of stumbling across one. Plus, of course, once the beast knows humans are in the area, they likely make a concerted effort to steer clear of them, whereas a bear may be more likely to investigate who's on its turf and approach the hiker directly. I think the real reason we are unlikely to see a Sasquatch in the wild is because of the nature of the beast itself. Science generally works the premise that if such a creature did exist, it would be some kind of an as yet unclassified ape or a surviving example of a known but extinct great ape from the past, such as Gigantopithecus, a 12-foot tall ape that is thought to have gone extinct around 300,000 years ago. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if it's not an ape at all, but something more closely linked to a human being, perhaps even an offshoot of Homo sapien itself? Bigfoot is often referred to as a hairy man. What if that description is truer than one might imagine? Consider what it would mean if such were the case. What if evolution took a subspecies of human being and made them larger, more robust, and stronger than the average human? Then, on top of that, it gave them acute eyesight and enhanced hearing, making them capable of seeing and hearing their prey, or an intruder and potential threat, long before any human would be able to see or hear them. Then give them home field advantage, that is, an intimate knowledge of their environment, and finally make them largely nocturnal in nature, and you have something that would be a formidable creature to track down, much less capture. Another point to consider is that there have been audio recordings suggest that the Sasquatch sometimes articulate a sort of guttural chatter that suggests they may actually possess a kind of language. This is sometimes referred to as samurai chatter because of its resemblance to the expressive styles used in old samurai films. If true, this would suggest a high degree of intelligence, far beyond that of a modern ape or gorilla, and even the possibility of abstract thought. In fact, that would go far in explaining why no one seems to be able to capture an image one on a trail cam. They may be sophisticated enough to understand that such devices, being specifically placed by humans, are a threat, and so not only avoid them, but even possess the means to tell others in their tribe to be careful around them. So will we ever find the smoking gun evidence that will prove the existence of this elusive creature once and for all? Unfortunately, the people most qualified to look for them, primatologists and anthropologists, are not interested, largely because they either don't think there's anything to it, or they're afraid it'll hurt their career. While those who do make looking for Bigfoot a full-time hobby are not scientifically trained. While some of them may have some serious tracking skills, they seldom possess either the resources or the knowledge to make them truly capable of getting close to a live Sasquatch. And as far as TV show Bigfoot hunters ever finding one goes, I imagine traipsing through the forest with a cameraman and a sound engineer and whatever support crew is along for the ride should be fairly easy to see and hear coming from miles away. As such, I suspect that one is unlikely to stumble across a Sasquatch unless it's the creature's intention to show itself, in which case you might regret the encounter. In any case, and while such people may be well-meaning, in the end they may in fact actually be doing more harm than good. How? If these creatures are migratory, and there's evidence to support such an idea, once they notice human beings encroaching upon their territory, they may simply choose to move on to more pristine forests, leaving former Sasquatch hotspots now devoid of these creatures, making it, of course, even harder to find one. That's not to say, however, that it's impossible for one of these individuals to ever hit pay dirt. Perhaps one day a professional tracker, working solo and comfortable traversing the darkened woods in the middle of the night, might get lucky, but such people are few and far between. On the other hand, it's always possible a hunter will accidentally encounter one of these creatures and actually take the shot. If so, let's hope he appreciates the magnitude of what it would mean if he had the evidence to prove the existence of the creature, and will be clear-headed enough to secure a few samples from the carcass before the beast's fellow tribe members show up to see what all the fuss is about. Of course, he would have to be an extraordinarily brave person to not only outrun his victim's likely outraged companions, but to endure the firestorm his actions will have with the public. We'll just have to wait and see. In the end, maybe technology will come to the rescue after all. Drones equipped with infrared thermal cameras are an increasingly effective way of searching dark forest looking for hidden animals. Plus, it would be especially useful since it would be something that would be difficult for a Sasquatch to either hide from or outrun. If we could ever learn to make a drone whisper quiet, and put it in the hands of someone with the skills and patience to scan the woods night after night in the hope of finally cornering the elusive creature and getting some solid, scientifically valid imaging, we might yet get the proof we need. In a way, though, that might be sad, for once science confirms the existence of the creature, it will be drained of all its mystery and simply become another rare animal to be studied, cataloged, and eventually caged. And think what a loss that would be to the world of cryptozoology and the greater world of wonder and magic we all live in. Hey, if you like this video, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that like button below and consider subscribing to see more stories like this from our curious world. And here's your final thought for the day. One time Bigfoot saw me, but nobody believed him. Bye for now. See you next time.